I like to think I'm a pretty rational guy. I don't go looking for trouble, and I definitely don't believe in all that gut feeling nonsense. But let me tell you, when your instincts start screaming at you, maybe, just maybe, you should listen. Unfortunately for me, I didn't. And that's how I ended up in the most terrifying Uber ride of my life. I've always been the kind of person who enjoys my own space. I was never the type to go out every weekend or surround myself with large crowds. My life was simple: work, home, maybe a drink with a friend every now and then. And honestly, I liked it that way. I lived alone in a small apartment on the quieter side of town, the kind of place where the streetlights flickered more often than they stayed on, and the roads felt strangely empty after 10 p.m. It wasn't dangerous, just still, a little too quiet at times. But I liked the solitude. I liked the feeling of locking my door at night, knowing that inside, I was safe. At least that's what I thought. That night started like any other. A couple of drinks with a friend, some easy conversation, a few laughs, nothing out of the ordinary. I wasn't drunk, just relaxed enough to feel the weight of exhaustion settling in. The kind of tired that made my bed sound more tempting than anything else. So, I did what I always did when I stayed out late. I ordered an Uber. When the car pulled up to the curb, I hesitated, just for a second. The windows were too dark, the headlights dimmer than they should have been. Something about it felt off, but it was late, and I was too tired to overthink it. So, I did what I shouldn't have done. I ignored that tiny voice in the back of my mind, opened the door, and stepped inside. That was my first mistake, and before the night was over, I'd come to regret it more than anything else in my life. The door shut with a quiet click, and I immediately felt it. The air inside the car was thick, suffocating in a way I couldn't quite explain. The scent of something artificial, cheap air freshener, maybe, clung to the upholstery, but underneath it, there was something else, something stale. The driver didn't say a word as I settled into the backseat. No "Hey, how's your night?" or even a grunt of acknowledgement. He just gripped the wheel with gloved hands and pulled away from the curb. I glanced at the screen on my phone, confirming the route. It was the right one. Nothing seemed wrong. But the unease in my gut was growing. Something about the way he drove. It was too smooth, too calculated. Like he wasn't just driving. He was leading me somewhere. I cleared my throat. "Hey man, you been driving long tonight?" My voice sounded forced, but I needed something, anything, to break the silence. No response. I watched the back of his head, the way his shoulders were too stiff, too still. The rearview mirror reflected just a sliver of his face. His eyes were hidden in the darkness. I tried again. Could you turn the heat down a little? It's kinda stuffy back here." Nothing. My fingers twitched as I glanced at the app again. The estimated arrival time still showed 15 minutes. Just 15 minutes. I could handle that. Then the car turned, down a street I didn't recognize. I sat up straighter. The app hadn't updated. It still showed us on the main road. But we weren't. We were somewhere else. Somewhere darker. "Hey, I think you missed a turn," I said, forcing a small chuckle to keep my voice light. The driver still didn't respond. The GPS recalculated, blinking, rerouting. On my screen, that's when I saw it. The destination had changed. Not my home. Somewhere else. Somewhere I had never been before. My stomach dropped. "Hey, seriously, man. You missed my turn," I said, louder this time. I leaned forward slightly, gripping the edge of the seat. The driver finally reacted. Not with words. Not with a glance in the mirror. But by locking the doors. A quiet click. Every hair on my body stood on end. I tried the handle. It didn't budge. My pulse pounded against my skull. "Yo, man, unlock the door," I demanded, my voice sharper now. "This isn't funny." Still, he said nothing. The car kept moving, deeper into the darkness. And that's when I realized I wasn't going home tonight. The city lights disappeared behind us, swallowed by the creeping darkness of an unfamiliar road. My stomach clenched. The silence in the car was unbearable, thick with something wrong, something unnatural. I gripped my phone, my fingers slick with sweat. Think. Stay calm. The screen still showed my original destination, but I wasn't anywhere near home. The blue dot marking my location had veered off course, floating in a dead zone of unmarked roads. No street names. No signal towers. Nothing. I glanced up. The driver's hands were steady on the wheel, fingers wrapped too tightly, like he was forcing himself to stay relaxed. His face was hidden in the rearview mirror, just the edge of his jaw visible in the dim glow of the dashboard. I swallowed hard. Man, listen, if there's an issue with the app, I can just get out here. No problem. I forced a nervous chuckle. You can cancel the ride. I'll walk. The car accelerated. Not much, but enough to make my breath catch. I lunged for the door handle again, yanking hard. Locked. My pulse thundered in my ears. My throat was dry. I tapped on the window, trying to see outside. Just empty roads, flanked by skeletal trees, stretching into nothing. No other cars. No people. I was alone. With him. I shifted forward in my seat, heart pounding. Dude, let me out. I don't care where we are. I'll find my own way home. Still nothing. The driver reached up, his gloved hand moving slow, deliberate, and adjusted the rearview mirror. For the first time, I caught a glimpse of his eyes. Flat, cold, empty. A slow grin curled at the edge of his lips. That was when I knew. He wasn't just ignoring me. He was enjoying this. My stomach twisted. I darted my eyes back to my phone. I had to call someone. Anyone. No signal. Of course. Panic gnawed at the edges of my mind, but I forced it down. I needed a plan. Think, damn it. Then, up ahead, a gas station. Old, run down, its flickering sign barely casting any light. But it was something. A chance. I tightened my grip on my phone and made a split-second decision. If this car slowed down, even for a second, I was getting out. I didn't care if I had to break the window. I was not staying in this car. The station was coming up fast. Closer, closer, and then, the driver reached under his seat. I saw the glint of something metal, and my blood turned to ice. My breath hitched in my throat as I watched his hand disappear beneath the seat. What was he reaching for? A weapon? A knife? A gun? My mind raced through every possible scenario, none of them good. I couldn't wait to find out. The gas station was seconds away, its weak neon lights barely piercing through the darkness. I had one shot at this, one chance to get out. I forced myself to stay calm, to act natural. If he saw me panic, he'd be ready. I shifted slightly in my seat, preparing to move. Then, the car slowed down. Not much. Just enough to roll past the gas station. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might pass out. This was it. I launched myself at the door. I didn't care about finesse. I just threw my entire weight into it, slamming my shoulder against the frame. The lock held firm, unyielding, but I kept trying. My fingers fumbled at the handle, clawing at it, desperate to get out. The driver's head snapped toward me. His eyes weren't dead anymore. They were furious. The car swerved violently, tires screeching against the asphalt as he yanked the wheel. I slammed into the side door, my head bouncing off the window. Stars exploded behind my eyes. He was trying to throw me off balance. I barely had time to react before he reached for me, his gloved hand shooting backward, grasping blindly. I dodged, pressing myself against the door, but there was nowhere to go. Nowhere to run. I did the only thing I could think of. I punched him. Hard. My fist connected with the side of his head. His grip faltered just for a second, but that was all I needed. I reached for my phone, frantically unlocking it. My fingers trembled as I tried to pull up the emergency dial. Then, a hand clamped around my wrist. Cold. Tight. Unrelenting. He yanked me forward, dragging me closer. The car jerked as he lost control for a split second, and in that moment of chaos, my elbow smashed against the window. Crack. A web of fractures split across the glass. Not enough to break, but enough to give me hope. I wasn't going down without a fight. I swung again, aiming for his face, but this time, he was ready. He caught my arm mid-swing, twisting it painfully. His voice came then, low, steady, eerily calm. "You really should have just sat still." The car suddenly accelerated. My stomach dropped. We were heading straight into the darkness, away from the gas station, away from any chance of help. I thrashed against his grip, kicking at the dashboard, trying to wrench myself free. But he was strong, too strong. The road stretched ahead, endless and empty. I had to get out. Now, I threw my entire body against the cracked window, ignoring the pain, the dizziness from the hit to my head. The fractures deepened. One more hit. I braced myself, then slammed my elbow into the glass with everything I had. Shatter. The night air rushed in, cold and sharp. The driver cursed, momentarily losing control of the wheel. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I climbed through the broken window and jumped. I hit the ground hard. The impact knocked the breath from my lungs, pain shooting through my side as I tumbled across the asphalt. My jeans shredded against the rough pavement, and my palms burned as I scrambled for something, anything, to stop my momentum. The world spun. The roar of the car's engine filled my ears, a deafening sound against the quiet night. My vision blurred, my body screaming in pain, but I forced myself to move. I had to move. The car skidded to a stop just ahead. He wasn't leaving without me. I could hear the doors slam open, footsteps pounding against the pavement. He was coming. I pushed myself up, biting back a cry as pain shot through my ankle. My legs felt like they were made of lead, but I forced them to run. The road stretched ahead, endless and empty. There were no houses nearby, no street lights, just a dark, open road and the tree line on either side. My only chance was to get off the road, disappear into the woods before he could catch me. I veered left, sprinting toward the trees. Behind me, I heard him yell. The sound sent ice down my spine. It wasn't a scream of frustration or anger. It was amusement, like he wanted me to run, like he was enjoying this. I didn't stop. I plunged into the darkness, branches tearing at my arms as I crashed through the undergrowth. The trees were thick, the air damp with the scent of dirt and moss. The further I ran, the quieter the road became, until all I could hear was my own ragged breathing and the pounding of my heartbeat in my ears. But then, footsteps, heavy, deliberate, close. He was in the woods with me. I sucked in a breath, dropping low behind a thick tree trunk. My entire body ached, my chest rising and falling in sharp gasps. I had to stay quiet. The footsteps slowed. They were close, too close. I clamped a hand over my mouth, barely daring to breathe. The woods were silent now, except for the occasional rustle of leaves. Then, his voice cut through the darkness. "You really think I can't find you?" I swallowed hard, pressing myself tighter against the tree. "You should have stayed in the car," he continued, his voice casual, almost conversational. Like this was a game. I shut my eyes, willing myself to disappear. And then, a twig snapped, right behind me. The sound of the twig snapping sent a shockwave through my body. He was right behind me. I didn't think, I just moved. I launched myself forward, breaking into a dead sprint deeper into the woods. The branches clawed at my arms. My legs burned with exhaustion, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. Behind me, he laughed. A slow, mocking chuckle that made my stomach twist. "You can run all you want," he called out. "But you're not going anywhere." I ignored him, pushing myself faster. I needed to get out of these woods. But the trees stretched endlessly in every direction, and with each step, I realized I had no idea where I was going. There was no clear path, no lights in the distance. just an ocean of darkness swallowing me whole. And then I saw it. A small, rotting shed, barely visible through the thick trees. I hesitated only for a second before darting toward it. My chest heaved as I reached the door, fingers fumbling for the handle. It was unlocked. I yanked it open and threw myself inside. The moment I was in, I pressed my back against the door, heart hammering. The space was tiny, barely big enough to fit a rusted tool bench and a few broken shelves. Dust and mildew filled the air, and in the dim light, I could make out a pile of old, discarded tarps in the corner. I had nowhere to go. Outside, the footsteps slowed. They were right outside the door. I forced myself to breathe silently, chest rising and falling in shallow gasps. "Come on," his voice drawled, teasing. "You really think you can hide from me?" I clenched my jaw, gripping the edge of the shelf beside me. I could hear my own pulse in my ears. And then, silence. The kind of silence that suffocates, that presses down on you like a weight. I squeezed my eyes shut. Maybe he left. Maybe he... Thud. I jolted. The sound came from the wall to my left. Thud. My entire body locked up. He wasn't outside the door. He was on the other side of the shed. Knocking. Slow. Deliberate. Like he wanted me to know he was still there. I clenched my fists, my breathing shallow. "You can come out now," he whispered. "I won't hurt you much." My fingers tightened around a rusted wrench on the shelf. I had two choices. I could stay hidden and pray he left, or I could fight, and I wasn't sure which would keep me alive. I tightened my grip on the rusted wrench, feeling its cold weight in my palm. My breath was shallow, barely there, as if breathing too loudly would give me away. The knocking had stopped, but the silence wasn't comforting. It was suffocating. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the shed, leaving only me and the awareness that I wasn't alone. I knew he was still there, waiting, watching. A faint rustling sound came from the other side of the thin wooden wall. Slow footsteps, crunching softly against the dirt and dead leaves outside. He was circling the shed, taking his time. I pressed my back harder against the door, my sweaty fingers shifting on the wrench. I tried to steady my breathing, but my heart was hammering so violently it felt like it was shaking my entire body. And then, the doorknob rattled. A slow, deliberate twist. I choked back a gasp. The door was locked. I had made sure of that. But the knob kept turning back and forth, a silent message. He was playing with me, testing me. And then, clear as day, he whispered from the other side of the door, "I know you're in there." A shiver ran down my spine. His voice was different this time, lower, almost amused, like he was enjoying this. I held my breath, gripping the wrench so tight my knuckles ached. The door handle stopped moving. For a moment, nothing happened. And then, boom, the entire shed shook as he slammed his body against the door. I stifled a scream, stumbling back into the darkness. Boom. The wooden door groaned under the pressure, the old hinges straining. "Come on," he taunted, his voice muffled through the wood. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I scanned the tiny shed, my eyes darting over every rusted tool, every rotting shelf. No windows, no back exit. I was trapped. Another slam, and I heard the sickening crack of wood splintering. Panic clawed at my chest. I had seconds before he got in. I couldn't just sit there and wait to die. I had to do something, anything. I took a shaky step back, feeling my foot bump against something soft. The pile of old, discarded tarps. My breath hitched. An idea struck me. A stupid, desperate idea, but it was all I had. Hide. I didn't waste time. I dropped to the ground, yanking the heavy, dust-covered tarp over my body, pressing myself flat against the floor. Just as I did, the door burst open. The wood snapped in half, the hinges giving way as the door crashed against the floor. A gust of cold air rushed in, and then I heard it, his footsteps creaking against the rotting floorboards. He was inside. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing myself to stay completely still. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I could only listen. He took another step, his boots scraping against the wood. Then another. Slow, deliberate. I could feel him standing in the center of the shed, scanning the room. He was looking for me. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Then, a sound. A low, amused chuckle. Smart, he murmured. But not smart enough. My stomach twisted. And then, he flipped the first tarp over. The sound of fabric shifting, the dust rising into the air. He was checking, one by one. My entire body locked up. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. He was going to find me, and there was nothing I could do. Scene 8. Found. I held my breath as tight as I could. My body pressed against the cold, dusty floor. My fingers curled around the wrench, but my grip was weak. My hands were slick with sweat. I could hear him moving. Slow, careful. The sound of tarp fabric shifting, one by one. He was checking. I forced myself to stay still. Every instinct screamed at me to run, fight, do something. But I knew better. Any movement, any sound, and it was over. I clenched my jaw. The dust from the tarp scratched at my throat, my lungs burning for air. Then, he stopped. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. And then I heard it. A deep inhale. He was sniffing the air. I felt a cold rush of fear shoot down my spine. "I know you're here," he murmured, his voice softer now, amused, like this was a game. I squeezed my eyes shut, biting the inside of my cheek. "Don't move. Don't breathe." The heavy thump of his boots moved closer. I could feel the floor vibrate slightly under his weight. Then, another tarp was thrown aside. The soft sound of fabric brushing against wood. He was almost at me. I counted in my head. 3 tarps left. Then 2. My entire body locked up. I heard him shift, his breath close. Too close. Then, the tarp over me was ripped away. A rush of cold air. And then, I was face to face with him. I barely had time to react before he grabbed my arm. His grip was like a vice. Cold, strong, fingers digging into my skin so hard I thought they'd leave bruises. "Found you." The words sent a jolt of pure terror through my chest. Instinct kicked in. I swung the wrench as hard as I could. Crack. It connected. A sickening crunch as metal slammed into bone. He grunted, his grip loosening for a split second. That was all I needed. I tore away from him, scrambling to my feet. I didn't think, didn't hesitate. I ran, straight for the door, straight into the darkness outside. And behind me, I heard him laugh. A low, slow, chilling laugh. "Run all you want," he called after me. "You won't get far." And somehow, I knew he was right. The moment my feet hit the dirt outside, I didn't stop. I couldn't. My lungs screamed for air, but I pushed forward, my heartbeat hammering so hard it felt like it would burst through my chest. The night was cold, the wind slicing against my skin like tiny knives. My legs burned, muscles straining with every frantic step. I didn't dare look back. Looking back meant slowing down. Slowing down meant death. But I could hear him. His footsteps were heavy, deliberate, not running, but moving quickly, like he knew I had nowhere to go. And maybe he was right. The house was in the middle of nowhere. No streetlights, no visible roads, just trees stretching in every direction, their jagged branches reaching out like skeletal hands. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, and the darkness felt alive, thick and suffocating, like it was swallowing me whole. But I kept running. Then I heard it, a sharp whistle. It cut through the night air, sending a fresh wave of terror through me. It wasn't a call for help. It was a signal. I didn't have time to process what that meant. My foot snagged on something, a root, a rock, I don't even know. And before I could catch myself, I fell hard. The impact knocked the breath from my lungs, my face scraping against the dirt. Pain shot through my knees, my palms burning from the rough ground. I barely had time to scramble up before I heard something else. A rustling, Not behind me, ahead, and then a second set of footsteps. Panic hit me like a punch to the gut. He wasn't alone. There was someone else out here. I turned sharply, sprinting toward the only thing I could see, a barely visible path between the trees. I didn't know where it led, but it didn't matter. I just had to keep moving. The sounds behind me grew louder, closer. My breaths came in ragged gasps, my vision blurring from the sheer panic flooding my system. My hands grasped at tree trunks, pushing off them to keep my speed. I could hear my own blood pounding in my ears. Then, a hand snatched my wrist. I screamed, twisting violently. The grip was different, not as strong as his, but firm, desperate. And then I saw her, a woman, wide-eyed, breathless, terrified. "Don't scream," she hissed, yanking me off the path and into the brush. I barely had time to react before she dragged me down, pressing my body against the damp earth. Her breathing was ragged, her fingers digging into my arm. And then I heard them, 2 sets of footsteps, both of them walking, slow, deliberate, searching. I held my breath, my pulse slamming against my ribs. And then, one of them spoke. "Find him yet?" My stomach turned to ice. "No, but he's close." The woman's grip on my arm tightened. She was hiding too, and that meant one thing. I wasn't the first. Scene 10, the other victim. I could barely breathe. The woman's grip on my arm was iron tight. Her body pressed low against the cold, damp ground. I didn't know who she was, where she had come from, or how long she had been hiding out here. But I knew one thing. She was just as scared as I was. We lay there in the thick underbrush, surrounded by darkness, our breathing shallow, trying to make as little noise as possible. The footsteps continued, crunching over dead leaves and twigs, getting closer, then stopping. I could hear their breathing now. They were just feet away. "You sure you saw him run this way?" one of them muttered. "Yeah, he's close." The other voice was the driver's. I would recognize that deep, deliberate tone anywhere. My whole body went rigid. If they found us, I knew we wouldn't stand a chance. The woman slowly lifted her head just a fraction, her dark, terrified eyes meeting mine. Her lips barely moved as she mouthed 2 words. "Stay quiet." She knew them, or at least, she knew what they were capable of. I wanted to ask her so many things. How she got here, how long she had been running, what they had done to her. But there was no time. The footsteps started moving again, but this time, they were splitting up. One of them veered left, deeper into the trees. The other came straight toward us. My heart slammed so hard in my chest I thought for sure they could hear it. Then, a sharp rustling. The woman suddenly reached out, grabbing a rock from the dirt beside her. Before I could stop her, she hurled it into the distance. The sound it made as it crashed into the underbrush was deafening. Instantly, both men snapped their heads in that direction. There, he ran that way. Without hesitation, they took off toward the noise. We didn't wait. The second they disappeared, the woman grabbed my wrist and yanked me up. We ran. My legs were weak, my muscles burning, but I didn't stop. Neither of us did. I didn't know where she was leading me, but I trusted her. She had saved me, and I wasn't about to let her go. We darted through the trees, our footsteps muffled by the damp forest floor. The wind howled through the branches above us, and every shadow seemed alive. After what felt like an eternity, we stumbled upon a clearing. A small, half-rotten hunting cabin stood at the edge of the woods, barely visible in the moonlight. The windows were cracked, the door hanging slightly off its hinges. It looked abandoned, but the woman didn't hesitate. She pulled me toward it, shoving open the door just enough for us to slip inside before closing it behind us. The interior was musty, dust swirling in the faint light that seeped through the broken windows. A tattered couch sat in the corner, its fabric ripped to shreds. Old furniture lay overturned, and a faint smell of rot hung in the air. We collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath. For a moment, we just sat there, our bodies trembling from exhaustion and fear. Then, Finally, I turned to her. "Who are you?" I whispered. She stared at me for a long moment before finally speaking. "They took me first," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And they're not going to stop until they get us both." For a moment, her words just hung in the air, thick and suffocating. "They took me first." I stared at her, trying to process what she had just said. My lungs still burned from running, my hands were shaking, and my mind felt like it was scrambling to keep up. "What do you mean, they took you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she rubbed at her wrists, like there were shackles there, invisible but heavy, like she could still feel them. "I mean exactly what it sounds like," she murmured. "I was in that car before you, before a lot of people, and I got away." My blood turned ice cold. "How long?" I asked. She swallowed hard. "I don't know. Days, maybe. Weeks. I lost track. I felt sick. I had barely survived one night with these people. This group, whatever they were. And she had been trapped for weeks? Who are they?" I asked, my voice hoarse. She shook her head. "I don't know their real names, but I know what they do. I know what they want." I didn't even want to ask, but I had to. "What do they want?" She looked me dead in the eye. "People." That single word sent a shiver through my entire body. "For what?" I pressed, but part of me didn't want to know the answer. Her jaw tensed, and she looked away. "Whatever they feel like," she said finally. "Sometimes they just want to scare you. Other times, it's worse." My stomach twisted into knots. I could still feel that zip tie cutting into my wrists, still hear the low hum of the radio as the driver refused to acknowledge my terror. I thought I had been lucky to get away, but now I was realizing I was never supposed to leave that car alive, and neither was she. I felt ball rising in my throat. "You said they took you first," I murmured. "How did you escape?" Her lips pressed into a thin line, and for a long time, I thought she wasn't going to answer. Then, finally, "I killed him," she whispered, a silence so thick it felt like the room had stopped breathing. I couldn't move, couldn't think. She stared at the floor, her hands clasped together so tightly her knuckles had turned white. "I don't know if it was the driver. They switch people in and out all the time. But I know it was one of them." Her voice was flat, emotionless, like she had repeated this story to herself 100 times. I waited, pretended I was weak, let him think I was too scared to fight back. And when the time was right, I took my chance. She swallowed. "I don't even remember how many times I stabbed him. I just remember the way his body went still. And then I ran. I ran until my legs gave out and I hid. I've been hiding ever since." A deep, aching silence filled the space between us. I had no words. All this time, I had thought I was the only one, that this was just some freak incident, some one-time horror that I had barely escaped. But now, it was so much worse than that. I wasn't the first, and I sure as hell wouldn't be the last. She turned to me then, her eyes dark and serious. "They're not going to stop," she said. "They're going to keep coming until they find us." And for the first time, it hit me. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. The weight of her words settled into my chest like a stone. "They're going to keep coming until they find us." I wanted to believe she was being paranoid. That maybe, just maybe, we were safe now. But deep down, I knew she was right. I could feel it. That same gnawing paranoia that had started the moment I stepped into that Uber. The creeping sensation that someone was always watching, always waiting. And if she was right, if this wasn't just a random nightmare I had barely escaped, but part of something bigger, then I wasn't just in danger. I was being hunted. I swallowed, my throat dry. "Then what do we do?" She hesitated, like she had been waiting for me to ask, but still didn't have a real answer. "We can't stay here," she finally said. "They're looking for us." "How do you know?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She didn't say anything. Instead, she grabbed my phone off the table and flipped it over, holding the screen toward me. An unknown number. Missed call. Missed call. Missed call. At least 10 in the last hour. I felt a chill run down my spine. I hadn't even heard my phone ring. My ringer had been on silent ever since I left the hospital, and I hadn't checked it since. But there was more. A text. You shouldn't have left. My stomach twisted into knots. You think it's them? I asked. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. I felt like the air in the room had turned to ice. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it all. Had they been tracking me this whole time? Watching me? I thought I had escaped, but I had never really left. We have to go, she said, standing up abruptly. Now. I wanted to argue, to demand answers, to tell myself that maybe we were overreacting. But that single message on my phone was enough. This wasn't over. It had never been over. I grabbed my jacket and followed her out the door, my pulse pounding. Outside, the street was eerily quiet. The kind of quiet that felt wrong. The wind whispered through the trees. The streetlights flickered, and then a car, sitting at the end of the block, black, tinted windows, engine running, waiting. My breath caught in my throat. Get in the car, she whispered. Now. But my feet were frozen to the pavement, because in that moment, as I stared at the dark car sitting just a little too still, a little too patient, I knew we were already too late. They had found us. I didn't move. I couldn't. The black car sat at the end of the street, motionless, except for the soft rumble of its engine. Its presence was suffocating, like a predator waiting for its prey to make the first mistake. Beside me, she gripped my arm, her fingers digging into my sleeve. We have to go. Now. My mind was racing. If we ran, would they follow? If we got in the car, would they block us in? Every option felt like a trap. Then, the headlights flashed once. A warning. My stomach turned to ice. They're waiting for us to make a move, she whispered. We have to be smart. The sound of my own breathing filled my ears, ragged and unsteady. My hands clenched into fists. Think, think, think. Then, an idea. Keys, I muttered. Give me your keys. She hesitated for half a second before pulling them from her pocket and shoving them into my palm. Without another word, I turned and walked, not ran, toward her car. Every step felt heavy, deliberate, like I was walking straight into my own grave. She followed close behind, her presence the only thing keeping me from falling apart. The black car still hadn't moved. They were waiting. I reached the driver's side door, heart hammering, and forced myself to stay calm. Fumbling with the keys would be a dead giveaway. They'd know we were afraid. I slid the key into the lock, turned it, and pulled open the door. That's when I heard it. The low, deliberate creak of a car door opening. Not ours. Theirs. I froze. She sucked in a sharp breath beside me. Get in. My voice was barely above a whisper, but she didn't hesitate. She yanked open the passenger door and slammed it shut behind her just as I slid into the driver's seat. The black car's front door was open now. A figure stepped out, tall, still, watching. I jammed the key into the ignition and turned it. The engine roared to life. But before I could throw it into drive, they moved. Not a run, not a casual stroll, just a step forward, like they were taunting me. I felt my blood turn to fire. Hold on. I slammed my foot on the gas. The tires screeched as we tore down the street. The force threw us back into our seats, but I didn't care. I didn't look back, because I already knew. They were coming, and this was only the beginning. The car sped down the darkened streets, the tires screeching as I took a sharp turn without slowing down. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Are they following? She asked, voice barely above a whisper, but I could hear the panic in it. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to know, but I did anyway. In the rearview mirror, headlights. Two bright, unblinking orbs, gaining on us fast. "Shit," I muttered. My foot pressed harder on the gas, but the car behind us didn't slow down. It matched our speed. My pulse hammered in my ears. I took another sharp turn, almost clipping the curb, hoping, praying, that maybe I could lose them. But when I looked again, they were still there. "They're not stopping," she said, gripping the dashboard as I weaved through the empty streets. "I know," I said through gritted teeth. There were no cops, no people, just us and them. I tried to think. Where could we go? The highway? No, too open. A dead-end street? No, too risky. Then I saw it. The old gas station up ahead, its neon sign flickering weakly in the night. It wasn't much, but it was something. I yanked the wheel and swerved into the lot, the tires screeching as I came to an abrupt stop. Without hesitation, I killed the engine and turned off the lights. The car behind us sped past, flying down the road without stopping. I held my breath. She did too. We waited. 5 seconds. 10. Nothing. "Did we lose them?" she whispered. I didn't answer. I didn't trust it. Something felt wrong. Then, a car door slammed in the distance. Not from our car. Not from theirs. From somewhere else. My blood ran cold. We weren't alone. And whoever was out there, they knew exactly where we were. The silence was unbearable. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my fingers ached. My breathing was shallow, controlled, as if even the slightest sound would give us away. Then, footsteps. Slow, measured, somewhere outside the car. She stiffened beside me, her hand clutching my arm in a silent plea. "Do you see them?" she whispered, barely audible. I turned my head slightly, eyes scanning the dark lot. The gas station was lifeless. No attendant, no customers, just a few dim bulbs flickering above the pumps. But something moved near the station's entrance. A figure. They weren't walking toward us. Not yet. They just stood there, watching. A chill crawled up my spine. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice cracking. I had no idea. If we stayed in the car, we were trapped. If we got out, we were vulnerable. Then, another noise. Not from the gas station. From behind us. I turned slowly, eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. A second figure, standing directly behind our car. I couldn't make out a face, just the shape of a person, standing completely still in the dim glow of the distant streetlight. No movement, no sound, just waiting. A sharp tap on the window shattered the silence. We both jumped. The first figure, now at my door. My chest tightened. They leaned down slightly, trying to see inside the car. I could barely breathe. Then, I heard it. A voice. Muffled, distorted through the glass. "Get out! Get out!" The words were muffled through the glass, but there was no mistaking them. The figure outside my door didn't move, didn't flinch, just stood there, waiting. The second figure behind the car remained perfectly still. My pulse pounded in my ears. My grip on the steering wheel was slick with sweat. Beside me, she was frozen, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. "We can't stay here," I whispered. She barely nodded. I flicked my eyes toward the dashboard. The engine was still running, but my foot was on the brake. I had two choices: get out or drive, and I wasn't getting out. With one deep breath, I shifted the car into reverse. The second figure behind us moved. Fast. They darted around the back of the car, straight toward my window. I slammed my foot on the gas. The car lurched backward. The figure barely dodged it, stumbling to the side. I twisted the wheel, shifting back into drive. My headlights cut across the pavement, briefly illuminating the gas station. And that's when I saw them. More of them. 3, 4, 5. Standing in the shadows near the building. All facing us. Just standing there. Watching. I swerved the car toward the exit. The wheels screeched against the pavement as we tore out of the lot. I didn't stop. Didn't look back. Not until we were miles down the road. Only then did I dare to glance in the rearview mirror. The road behind us was empty, but I knew we weren't alone. The silence in the car was suffocating. Neither of us spoke, but I could hear her breathing, shaky, uneven. I wasn't doing much better. My hands were trembling on the wheel, knuckles white from gripping it too hard. I kept my eyes on the road, but something felt off. The road stretched ahead, empty and endless. No streetlights, no signs, just the dull glow of my headlights cutting through the darkness. We had been driving for at least 20 minutes, but something wasn't right. Where the hell are we? I muttered. She finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know. I reached for my phone, glancing at the screen. No service. That was impossible. We weren't out in the middle of nowhere. We should have hit a town by now. A gas station, a highway sign, something. But there was nothing. I checked the rearview mirror. The road behind us was just as empty. No signs of the gas station. No sign of the people we left behind. A chill ran down my spine. This doesn't make sense, I said, gripping the wheel tighter. We should have hit something by now. She didn't respond. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A shape, standing on the side of the road. My breath caught in my throat. My hands clenched the wheel so hard my fingers ached. It was the same man, the one from the gas station, standing completely still, watching us pass. No, she whispered beside me. No, that's not possible. I pressed my foot down harder on the gas. The speedometer climbed. I looked ahead. The road stretched on. Then I looked back in the mirror. He was still there, exactly where we had passed him, unmoving, watching. The air in the car felt thick, pressing against my chest. I swallowed hard. We just keep driving, I said, more to myself than to her. She nodded, though I could see the terror in her eyes. But deep down, I already knew. We weren't getting away. I kept my foot on the gas, pushing the speedometer past 80. The road stretched out in front of us, a never-ending ribbon of asphalt cutting through the blackness. My heart pounded in my chest, but I told myself that if we just kept driving, we'd find something, anything. But after another 15 minutes, dread started to settle deep in my stomach. Something was wrong. I glanced at the fuel gauge. We were running low, and then I saw it. A gas station up ahead. My heart leaped into my throat. I nearly slammed on the brakes as I slowed down. I could see the flickering neon sign, the pumps, the cracked pavement, but something was off. I looked at her. She looked at me. Neither of us spoke. I pulled into the lot, scanning the area. Empty. The same dim lights. The same single car parked near the side. The same goddamn gas station. No, I whispered. It was the exact same place. The same trash can knocked over near the entrance. The same busted sign in the window. The same place where we had stopped before. She was shaking. We didn't turn around. We didn't. I know, I said quickly, gripping the wheel. I turned and looked behind us, expecting to see a long stretch of road leading back. But there was nothing. Just darkness. The road we had come from was gone. She covered her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. This isn't real, she choked out. This can't be real. I tried to stay calm, to breathe, but my mind was spinning. This was impossible. This didn't make sense. I looked at the gas station again, and that's when I saw him, standing at the entrance. The same man, not moving, not blinking, just standing there, waiting. Something in me snapped. I slammed the car into reverse, tires screeching as I backed out of the lot. I turned onto the road, speeding forward without hesitation. We just keep going, I muttered. No stopping, no looking back. She nodded, wiping her face. We drove in silence. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15. Then, up ahead, a gas station. The same gas station. And standing at the entrance, the same man, watching, waiting. The scream caught in my throat, but I didn't let it out. We were trapped, and whatever was happening, it wasn't going to let us go. I slammed on the brakes so hard that the car skidded sideways, tires screeching against the pavement. My hands were locked around the wheel, my knuckles white. This wasn't possible. We hadn't turned around. We hadn't looped back. And yet, the same gas station stood before us. The same man stood at the entrance. And he was closer this time. My breathing was shallow, ragged. I felt her trembling beside me, gripping the edge of the seat so tightly her fingers were turning pale. "What do we do?" she whispered. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because at that moment, the man moved. Not fast, not suddenly, just a slow, deliberate step forward. Then another, and another. His face was still hidden in shadow, but I could see enough now to make out his outline. Tall, thin, unnatural. He took another step, then another, and suddenly, he was running, straight at us. "Gio!" she screamed. I didn't think. I just slammed my foot on the gas. The car lurched forward, tires spinning before catching the road, and we shot past the gas station like a bullet. I didn't dare look in the rearview mirror. I didn't want to see if he was still there. We drove, and drove, and drove. The road stretched endlessly before us, but something was wrong. There were no signs, no mile markers, no exits, no anything. Just the empty, desolate road, stretching into darkness. I checked my phone again. No signal. The battery was somehow already at 2%. Then I glanced at hers. It was dead. Neither of us spoke, because there was nothing left to say. We weren't getting out of here. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. And deep down, I knew it. This road, this place, it had no end. And we weren't alone in it. The road stretched into the abyss, an endless ribbon of asphalt swallowed by the night. My hands were locked onto the wheel, but I wasn't sure why. I wasn't steering anymore. I wasn't even sure if I was still in control. We had been driving for what felt like hours, maybe days. Maybe we had never even moved at all. Beside me, she sat in silence, her breath shallow, her fingers curled into the fabric of her seat. Neither of us spoke. What was there to say? The headlights cut through the void, illuminating nothing but the same cracked pavement, the same faded lines, over and over again. No signs, no exits, no landmarks. Just the road, just the night, just us. And then, the radio crackled. It had been silent this whole time. Static, dead air, nothing. But now, through the speakers, a voice whispered, "You shouldn't have left." My heart nearly stopped. I turned to her. She turned to me. Neither of us had spoken. The voice wasn't ours. The radio hissed again, the static shifting, reforming, breaking apart and coming back together in something that almost sounded like laughter. Low, amused, inhuman. Then, the GPS lit up. Turn left. I nearly slammed on the brakes. There was no left, no road, no intersection, nothing but the darkness. And yet, as I blinked, the road beside us changed. A turn appeared out of nowhere, a narrow path cutting into the black, lined with dead trees that hadn't been there a second ago. The voice on the radio whispered again, softer this time. "Go on. You've come this far." My stomach clenched. Every instinct screamed at me to keep driving, to stay on the road, to ignore it. But when I looked back at the GPS, the road ahead was gone. Nothing but darkness beyond my headlights. No more pavement, no more road, just an endless, yawning void, waiting for us to drive straight into it. I felt my fingers tighten on the wheel. There was no choice. Slowly, my foot pressed the brake. The car slowed. The wheel turned. And as we veered off the main road, onto that impossible new path, I swear, I saw something waiting for us in the trees. And it was smiling. The end? Or is it just the beginning?